The laughter came first, sharp and bright as shattering glass, cutting through the hum of 100 conversations and silencing them all at once. Enora Liddell stood frozen at the edge of the great hall, the borrowed silk of her gown suddenly feeling like iron chains, her fingers white where they gripped the stem of an untouched wine glass. Around her, the wedding feast of Lord Pemberton's eldest daughter continued in a swirl of candlelight and velvet, but every face had turned in her direction. Not toward her, exactly. Toward Petrina. Her cousin stood 3 feet away, resplendent in burgundy taffeta that must have cost more than Enora's family earned in a year. Petrina's hand was pressed to her chest in mock surprise, her lips curved in the particular smile she reserved for public cruelty. "You cannot possibly expect to sit at the family table," Petrina said, her voice pitched perfectly to Carrie. "I brought you as a favor to your mother, not as an equal. The servants' quarters would be more appropriate, though I doubt they would have you either, dressed in my cast-offs." The words landed like arrows finding their mark. Enora felt the heat rush to her cheeks, felt the weight of dozens of aristocratic gazes pressing down on her like stones. The gown she wore, the pale blue silk that had made her feel beautiful for the first 3 hours of this evening, was indeed Petrina's from 2 seasons past, altered hastily by Enora's own hands to fit her smaller frame. She had known accepting this invitation was a mistake. Her mother had warned her, eyes sad with understanding. "Petrina has never been kind to you, love. Why would tonight be different?" But Enora had wanted so desperately to believe, to hope that for one evening she might experience the world her father had lost when his shipping business collapsed. The world of chandeliers and champagne, of music and moonlit gardens, of people who did not have to calculate whether they could afford candles or bread, but not both. "I did not ask for the family table," Enora said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You told me I would be seated with the other companions. You directed me here yourself." Petrina's laugh tinkled like poisoned bells. "Did I? How clumsy of me. Though I cannot imagine why you would believe anything I said. You have always been rather desperately gullible, cousin." Someone in the crowd snickered. A woman whispered behind her fan. A man in military regalia shook his head with something that might have been pity or disgust. Enora's throat constricted. She should leave. Turn around and walk out of this glittering nightmare, find a carriage, return home to her mother's modest house, and pretend this evening had never happened. But the entrance was 50 feet away, and between her and the doors stood clusters of wedding guests, now openly staring, their whispered conversations a hissing sea of judgment. To reach the exit, she would have to walk past all of them, wearing her humiliation like a banner. She could not move. "Perhaps," Petrina continued, clearly enjoying herself, "you should find a corner somewhere and wait quietly until I am ready to leave, like the poor relation you are." The silence that followed felt eternal. So Enora's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed, her chest tight with the effort of maintaining composure. This was worse than poverty, worse than the years of mending her own clothes and tutoring merchant children for pennies. This was public execution of whatever dignity she had left. "She will do no such thing." The voice came from behind her, low and authoritative, carrying an edge that cut through the murmurs like a blade through silk. Enora turned. The man who had spoken was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of face that artists immortalized in marble, all sharp angles and controlled intensity. He wore evening clothes of impeccable tailoring, black and silver, that somehow made every other man in the room look like they were playing dress-up. His eyes held the gray of storm clouds, and they were fixed on Petrina with an expression that made her cousin's smile falter. "Your Grace," Petrina breathed, her voice suddenly honeyed. "I did not see you approach. We were simply sorting out a small confusion regarding seating arrangements." "I heard precisely what you were doing, Mrs. Hale." His tone could have frozen wine in its glass. and I find myself uninterested in your explanations." He stepped forward, and the crowd parted for him like water around a stone. When he reached Honora's side, he extended his arm with the casual authority of someone who had never in his life been refused. "Miss Liddell," he said, and the fact that he knew her name sent a shock through her spine. "You will sit beside me this evening." Honora stared at his outstretched arm as if it were a serpent. She did not know this man, and did not understand why he would intervene, what he could possibly want from her. Nothing in her life had prepared her for this moment, for the weight of his attention and the bizarre rescue he seemed to be offering. "Your Grace," Petrina interjected, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "Surely you do not mean to. She is no one. The daughter of a failed merchant, entirely unsuitable for your company. I will determine who is suitable for my company, Mrs. Hale." He did not look at Petrina. His gaze remained fixed on Honora, waiting. "Miss Lytle, my arm, if you please." Every rational thought screamed at her to refuse. This was a trap of some kind. It had to be. Men like this, men who commanded rooms and silenced crowds with a word, did not rescue women like her out of kindness. But the alternative was Petrina's smirking face and a long walk of shame through whispered condemnation. Honora placed her hand on his arm. The contact was electric, even through gloves and fabric. His arm was solid beneath her fingers, warm and steady, and he covered her hand briefly with his own before turning toward the high table. "Come," he said simply. She went. The walk to the front of the hall felt like crossing a battlefield. Honora could feel the stairs like physical pressure against her skin, heard the whispers explode in their wake like gunpowder catching flame. Who is she? Did he say Liddell, the shipping family that went bankrupt? Why would the Duke of Ravencrest? Duke? The word penetrated Honora's daze like a knife through butter. She stumbled slightly, and his hand immediately moved to steady her, pressing against the small of her back with proprietary confidence. "Careful," he murmured, for her ears alone. "You are a duke," she breathed. "I am the Duke of Ravencrest. Did you not know?" "I did not." She swallowed hard. "Your Grace, I cannot sit at the high table. I am not supposed to be here at all. My cousin brought me as her companion, and I do not understand why you would—" "Miss Lytle." He stopped walking, turning to face her. Around them, the crowd pretended not to watch while watching intently. "Do you wish to return to your cousin's tender mercies?" "No." "Do you wish to leave this hall in disgrace, providing entertainment for people who would forget your name by morning?" "No." "Then you will sit beside me. You will smile as though this was always the plan. And when the evening ends, we will discuss what happens next." What happens next? The words hung between them, heavy with implication. "I do not even know your name," Honora said helplessly. "Beyond your title." Something stirred in those storm-colored eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or surprise. "Theron," he said. "Theron Ashford." Then he was guiding her forward again, and they had reached the high table, and a servant was pulling out a chair beside the place of honor, and Honora was sitting down in a seat, meant for duchesses and countesses, while the entire wedding feast looked on. The bride's mother, a formidable woman in peacock blue, leaned across the table with barely concealed shock. "Your Grace, I was not aware you had brought a guest this evening." "An oversight in communications, Lady Pemberton. Miss Liddell is a dear friend of my sister's. She arrived separately, and I am only now reuniting with her." The lie was seamless, delivered with such casual conviction that even Honora almost believed it. She forced herself to smile, to nod in agreement, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "How delightful," Lady Pemberton said, though her expression suggested it was anything but. "And what was your name again, dear?" "Honora Liddell, my lady." "Liddell." The older woman's brow furrowed. "The name seems familiar, though I cannot place." Miss Little's family has extensive connections in the northern shipping trade, Theron interrupted smoothly. Her father was a great friend of my late uncle. Another lie. Honora's father had never met anyone's late uncle. Her father currently sat in their cramped parlor, staring at walls that had once held paintings now sold to pay debts. But she could not contradict the Duke of Ravencrest in front of the entire wedding party. So she smiled and nodded, and felt the trap close around her with velvet-lined teeth. "How wonderful," Lady Pemberton said, clearly unconvinced, but unwilling to challenge a duke. "Do enjoy the feast." She turned away, and Honora released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Drink your wine," Theron murmured, not looking at her. His attention appeared fixed on the musicians preparing in the corner. "You look like you are about to faint." "I'm trying to understand what is happening. What is happening is that you are attending a wedding feast. Nothing more remarkable than that. You just told that woman I am friends with your sister. I do not know your sister. I do not know you. And 30 seconds ago, my cousin was trying to banish me to the servants' quarters." "Your cousin," Theron said quietly, "is a viper in silk. I have had the displeasure of her acquaintance before. Whatever she told you to bring you here tonight was undoubtedly designed to create exactly the scene we just witnessed." Honora felt cold. "You think she planned this? The humiliation?" "I think Mrs. Petrina Hale enjoys causing pain to those she considers beneath her, and that you have likely been her target before." He was right. Of course he was right. The invitations that led to embarrassment, the promises that turned to poison, the sisterly concern that masked contempt. Petrina had been toying with her for years, and Honora had kept believing, kept hoping, kept walking into traps like a fool. "Why did you intervene?" she asked. "Truly. You do not know me. What, do you gain nothing from rescuing a bankrupt merchant's daughter?" Theron finally turned to look at her directly. Up close, his features were even more striking, but also more human. She could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his jaw that suggested he was not as unaffected by this evening as he appeared. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "I have my own reasons for wanting company this evening. Reasons that have nothing to do with charity and everything to do with strategy." Before she could ask what that meant, a new voice interrupted. "Brother, I see you have found her." A young woman appeared at the table's edge, dark-haired like Theron, but with warmth where he had ice, her smile bright and curious as she examined Honora with unconcealed interest. "Ottilie," Theron said, something shifting in his voice. Meet Miss Honora Little. Miss Little, my sister, Lady Ottilie Ashford." "The friend you mentioned," Ottilie said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "How strange that I do not recall making your acquaintance, Miss Lytle, though I am quite certain I would remember someone so interesting." Honora opened her mouth, but no words came. She was trapped in a web of lies she had not spun, seated beside a duke whose motives she did not understand, introduced to a sister who clearly knew something she did not. And across the hall, Petrina Hale watched with an expression that promised this evening was far from over. The feast continued around them in a blur of courses and conversation, but Honora could barely taste the food placed before her. Each bite turned to ash on her tongue as she struggled to maintain the fiction of belonging. Ottilie Ashford had taken the seat on her other side, effectively bracketing her between the siblings like a valuable prisoner. The younger woman chatted easily, filling silences with questions about Cheltenham and the lending library and books they had supposedly discussed in correspondence. Honora answered as best she could, drawing on every scrap of intelligence she possessed to construct believable responses to questions about a friendship that didn't exist. "You must visit us at Thornwood Hall," Ottilie said brightly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "We have spoken so often of it in our letters. Theron's library would delight you." "I would be honored," Honora managed, though the words felt like swallowing glass. Beside her, Theron ate with mechanical precision, so exchanging occasional words with Lord Pemberton on his other side, but contributing little to the sisters' fabricated history. Every few minutes, his gaze swept the hall, searching for something or someone. She followed his attention once and found it landing on a woman in crimson velvet seated 3 tables away. Beautiful, blonde, with the kind of cold perfection that came from generations of careful breeding. The woman stared back at Theron with naked possessiveness. "Who is that?" Enora whispered to Ottilie during a lull in conversation. Ottilie's expression tightened. "Lady Fenella Blackwood, the woman my grandmother has decided Theron will marry." The words crashed over her like cold water. Of course, a duke with political problems did not rescue strangers from humiliation out of kindness. He did it because he needed a shield. "So, and your brother does not wish to marry her," Enora said slowly. "My brother would rather face a firing squad. Unfortunately, our grandmother is more persistent than any military force." Ottilie leaned closer, dropping her voice. "Fenella's family controls significant holdings in the north. The match would be strategically brilliant and personally catastrophic." "Why catastrophic?" "Because Fenella Blackwood has the warmth of a frozen lake and the compassion of a starving wolf." Ottilie's dark eyes held Enora's. "She would make him miserable. She would make all of us miserable. But grandmother sees only the alliance, and she has been maneuvering for months." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Enora turned to look at Theron, who was still watching Fenella with an expression carefully emptied of emotion. "Fame, he rescued me because your cousin's performance gave him an opportunity." Ottilie's smile was rueful. "Do not think too badly of him, Miss Lytle. He is not using you callously. He simply saw a chance to accomplish 2 things at once: rescue a woman from undeserved cruelty and create a complication in grandmother's carefully laid plans. I am a complication. You are a mystery. A beautiful stranger who appeared at a wedding feast and captured the Duke of Ravencrest's attention so thoroughly that he seated her in the place of honor and declared her a friend of the family." Ottilie's eyes sparkled. "By tomorrow morning, every gossip in London will be asking who you are and what your connection to my brother might be." The enormity of it crashed over Enora like a wave. This was not a simple rescue. It was a move in a game she did not understand, played on a board she could not see, with stakes she could not imagine. "I want no part of this," she said, her voice trembling. "I only came tonight because Petrina said, because you thought you might enjoy one evening of beauty and elegance before returning to your ordinary life." Ottilie's voice softened with unexpected sympathy. "I understand. Truly, I do. Then you understand why I need to leave. Now, before this becomes something I cannot escape." She started to rise, but Theron's hand closed around her wrist beneath the table. The grip was not painful, but it was unbreakable. "Sit down," he murmured without turning his head. "Fenella is watching. My grandmother is watching. Half the room is watching. If you leave now, the narrative becomes a duke who briefly amused himself with a bankrupt merchant's daughter before discarding her. Is that what you want? I want to go home. You will, but not yet. Not like this." Enora's eyes burned with frustrated tears. "You had no right to involve me in your schemes without my consent." "You are correct." He finally turned to look at her, and for a moment, she saw something genuine beneath the controlled facade, something that might have been regret. "And I apologize for that. But the choice now is not whether to be involved. It is how deeply involved you wish to be." Before she could respond, a new figure approached their table. The woman who stopped before them was elderly, but unbowed. Her silver hair swept back from a face that commanded respect through sheer force of presence. She wore black silk and diamonds that caught the candlelight like trapped stars, and her eyes, the same gray as Theron's, fixed on Enora, with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. "Grandmother," Theron said, rising. "May I present? I know who she is. The Dowager Duchess of Ravencrest did not offer her hand or any pleasantry. She simply stared at Enora, as though attempting to read her soul through her skin. Miss Little, of the Little Shipping Company, or what remains of it." Enora forced herself to stand, to curtsy, though her knees trembled. "Your Grace. Your father invested poorly and trusted unwisely. Your mother takes in mending to pay for bread. Your brother sold his commission to cover debts and now works as a clerk in a counting house." Each fact landed like a stone dropped from a great height. "You have no fortune, no prospects, and no business being seated at this table." The hall had gone silent around them. Even Lady Pemberton had stopped pretending not to listen. "Grandmother," Ottilie began, but the older woman silenced her with a single raised finger. "I am not finished." Lady Morvenna Ashford stepped closer, her diamonds glittering like ice. "You will explain to me, Miss Liddell, exactly why my grandson chose to make you the center of attention at this wedding feast. And you will tell me the truth, because I assure you, I will know if you lie." Every eye in the hall was upon them now. Enora could feel the weight of judgment, the gleeful anticipation of scandal, the hungry curiosity of people who would dine on her humiliation for weeks. But somewhere beneath her terror, a spark of anger ignited. She had done nothing wrong. She had accepted her cousin's invitation in good faith. She had been publicly humiliated through no fault of her own. And now this woman, this imperious stranger, was demanding explanations as though Enora were a criminal rather than a victim. "Your Grace," Enora said, and her voice did not shake. "I do not know why the Duke chose to intervene on my behalf. I did not ask for his assistance. I was not aware of his identity when he offered it. If his actions have inconvenienced you or complicated your plans, I suggest you direct your displeasure toward him rather than toward the woman he involved without consultation." Silence. Absolute, thunderous silence. Lady Morvenna's expression did not change, but something shifted in her gaze. Something that might have been surprise or respect or simply calculation. "Gosh, you have spine," the Dowager said finally. "That is unexpected. I have very little else, Your Grace. I might as well make use of it." For a long moment, the two women regarded each other. Then Lady Morvenna turned to her grandson. "You will explain this situation to me properly. Tonight. After we depart this circus." She looked back at Enora. "And you, Miss Liddell, will come with us. It seems we have much to discuss." She swept away without waiting for agreement, and Enora realized, with a sinking heart, that she had just traded one trap for another. The carriage ride to Thornwood Hall passed in weighted silence. Lady Morvenna sat opposite Enora, with the stillness of a predator at rest, her assessing stare never wavering. Ottilie fidgeted beside her grandmother, clearly longing to speak but restrained by some invisible protocol. And Theron sat beside Enora, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through her borrowed silk, his face revealing nothing. When they arrived, the townhouse stole Enora's breath despite her anxiety. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. Portraits of stern Ashfords watched from gilded frames. Servants appeared and vanished like ghosts, perfectly trained, perfectly silent. "The study," Lady Morvenna commanded, and they followed her through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. The study itself was masculine and warm, leather and oak, and the smell of old books. A fire crackled in the hearth, despite the mild evening. Lady Morvenna settled into a chair beside it, with the authority of a queen taking her throne. "Sit," she said. Enora sat. Theron remained standing by the window, his back to the room, so Ottilie perched on a settee, watching everyone with barely concealed anxiety. "Now," Lady Morvenna said, "the truth. From the beginning." Honora looked at Theron, but he offered no guidance. His reflection in the window glass was unreadable. So she told the truth. All of it. Petrina's invitation. The promised seat at a minor table. The sudden redirection to the place of honor. The public humiliation designed to maximize embarrassment. The Duke's unexpected intervention. Lady Morvenna listened without interruption. When Honora finished, the older woman's expression had not changed. "And you knew nothing of my grandson's situation with Lady Fenella?" "Nothing, Your Grace. I did not even know he was a duke until after he had already seated me at the high table." Lady Morvenna turned to Theron. "Well?" He finally turned from the window. In the firelight, his features seemed sharper, more dangerous. "Everything she says is true," he said. "I saw an opportunity, and I took it. The fault is mine." "The fault," his grandmother said acidly, "is that you continue to resist a perfectly suitable match for reasons you refuse to articulate. Lady Fenella is wealthy, connected, and willing. What more do you require?" "I require someone who does not make me wish to leap from the nearest window." "Melodrama does not become you, Theron." "Neither does marriage to a woman who views me as a title rather than a person." His voice hardened. "I have told you repeatedly, grandmother. I will not marry Fenella Blackwood. I do not care how strategically advantageous the alliance might be." "And what do you propose instead? To remain unmarried indefinitely? To let the Ravencrest line end with your stubbornness?" "I propose," Theron said slowly, "a compromise." The room stilled. He crossed to where Honora sat, looking down at her with an expression she could not decipher. "Miss Lydell, you find yourself in an unfortunate position. By tomorrow, gossip will have spread throughout London. You will be discussed, examined, and judged by people who do not know you and do not care to. Your reputation, already damaged by your family's circumstances, will be further complicated by your appearance at my side this evening." "I am aware," Honora said quietly. "I can offer you an alternative. Stay at Thornwood Hall as Ottilie's companion for the remainder of the season. Attend events as a friend of the family. Allow the gossip to position you as my interest." "Your interest," Lady Morvenna repeated flatly. "A potential courtship. Nothing binding, nothing permanent. Simply the appearance of a connection that would make pursuing Lady Fenella impossible for the duration." Theron's gaze held Honora's. "In exchange, I will ensure you leave this arrangement with impeccable references, connections that could secure you any position you desire, and enough compensation to ease your family's circumstances considerably." Honora's mind raced. It was madness. A duke proposing a fake courtship with a bankrupt merchant's daughter. The stuff of ridiculous novels, not real life. And yet, her mother's tired face, her father's empty eyes, the stack of bills they pretended did not exist, the future stretching ahead of her, gray and limited and small. "What guarantee do I have," she said carefully, "that this arrangement will not destroy what little reputation I have left? You will be presented as Ottilie's particular friend, a respectable connection, if modest. When the arrangement ends, it will be portrayed as a mutual decision that we did not suit. No scandal, no disgrace." "And if your grandmother investigates my background?" "I already know your background," Lady Morvenna interjected. "I knew it the moment I saw you seated beside my grandson. The Liddell family is not unknown to me. Your father was considered brilliant before his partner's betrayal ruined him." Honora blinked. "You knew?" "I make it my business to know everything, Miss Liddell. It is how I have kept this family from disaster for 40 years. The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "The question is not whether I disapprove of your circumstances. The question is whether you have the intelligence and fortitude to navigate the position my grandson is offering. I do not want to trap him into marriage. Good. Neither does he want to be trapped. Lady Morvenna stood, crossing to the fireplace with slow dignity. My grandson is correct that I cannot force him to marry Lady Fenella if he is publicly courting another woman. It would create exactly the scandal I wish to avoid. So here is my proposition within his proposition. She turned to face them both. You will conduct this charade with absolute discretion and absolute conviction. You will comport yourself as though you genuinely believe yourself worthy of a duke's attention. You will give society no reason to question the sincerity of Theron's interest. Her voice hardened. And when the season ends, you will depart gracefully, armed with everything my grandson has promised, and you will never speak of the arrangement's true nature to anyone. And if I refuse, then you leave tonight, with nothing but the gossip already following you. Lady Morvenna's smile was thin as a blade. The choice is yours, Miss Liddell. A few months of play acting for a lifetime of security, or return to your struggling family and hope that society forgets your face. Enora looked at Theron, who watched her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken unbidden. She looked at Ottilie, whose expression was pure hope. She looked at Lady Morvenna, whose eyes held challenge and grudging respect. She thought of her mother, mending by candlelight. 3 conditions, Enora said. Theron's eyebrow rose. What you are negotiating with a duke and a dowager duchess. I am negotiating with people who need me as much as I need this opportunity. She lifted her chin. Do you wish to hear my terms or not? For the first time all evening, something like genuine warmth spread across Theron Ashford's face. By all means, Miss Liddell, name your price. Enora's 3 conditions had been simple but firm. First, a letter to her mother explaining her position as Lady Ottilie's companion. Nothing about arrangements or schemes, just respectable employment that would ease her family's worry. Second, references and connections that would secure her future when the charade ended. Introductions to families seeking governesses or companions, letters of recommendation that carried weight. Third, the arrangement would end immediately if Theron decided to pursue a genuine match with anyone, Lady Fenella or otherwise. She would not be made a fool while he conducted a real courtship behind her back. Lady Morvenna had agreed to all 3 with a curt nod that suggested grudging respect. Theron had simply extended his hand, and when Enora took it, she felt the weight of the bargain settle around her like invisible chains. Now, 3 days later, she stood in the center of her new chambers at Thornwood Hall and tried to remember how to breathe. The room was impossible. Cream silk wallpaper with hand-painted roses, climbing toward a ceiling that seemed miles above her head. A bed so vast she could have fit her entire family in it with room to spare, draped in fabrics that whispered when she touched them, or windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, flooding the space with morning light that turned everything golden. Her mother's entire house could have fit inside this single room. Miss Liddell? A soft voice from the doorway. I am Marjorie. I have been assigned as your lady's maid. The girl who entered was perhaps 18, with copper hair tucked beneath a cap and kind eyes that held no judgment. She carried a tray with tea and pastries that smelled of butter and honey. I thought you might want breakfast before the modiste arrives, Marjorie said, setting the tray on a delicate table by the window. Lady Ottilie has arranged fittings for this afternoon. She said to tell you that she is very excited and will collect you at 11. Enora managed a nod, though her throat felt tight. Thank you, Marjorie. Is there anything else you need? Miss? The bath has been drawn, and I have laid out a morning dress. It belonged to Lady Ottilie, but she insisted you wear it until your own wardrobe is ready. Another borrowed dress. Another reminder that nothing here was truly hers. But when Honora bathed in water, scented with lavender and rose, when she dressed in muslin so fine it felt like wearing clouds, when she sat by the window and sipped tea from porcelain thin as eggshells, she could almost forget. Almost. The view from her window showed gardens that stretched toward a distant tree line, all manicured perfection and deliberate beauty. Gardeners moved among the flower beds like dancers, their work invisible from this height. Somewhere below, horses stamped in stables she could not see. Somewhere in this vast house, servants prepared meals she would eat from silver plates. This was the world her father had lost, the world Petrina had dangled before her like bait before a starving fish. And now, impossibly, she was living in it. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and Ottilia burst in without waiting for permission, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and her smile bright as sunshine. "You are awake. Excellent. I could not sleep at all, thinking about everything we need to do. The modiste is Madame Colette, the absolute best in London, and I have already sent her sketches of what I think would suit you. Blue, definitely, to bring out your eyes. And something dramatic in emerald for the Blackwood ball. Fenella will be livid when she sees you, which is precisely the point." The Blackwood ball? Honora's stomach dropped. Lady Fenella's family? Oh yes. Did I not mention? It is the event of the season, 2 weeks from now. Everyone who matters will be there, including grandmother's entire network of gossips and schemers. If we are going to convince society that Theron is genuinely courting you, that is where we must make our stand. Honora set down her teacup with trembling fingers. "Ottilie, I am not certain I can." "You can." Ottilie crossed to sit beside her, taking her hands with surprising warmth. "I know this seems overwhelming. I know you feel like a fraud wearing borrowed clothes in a borrowed life. But Honora, you belong here as much as anyone. More, perhaps, because you understand what it means to lose everything. These people," she gestured vaguely at the window, "they have never known struggle. They have never known fear. They play their games because they have nothing else to occupy their empty little minds. And your brother? Does he play games?" Ottilie's expression softened. "Theron plays the games he must to protect the people he loves. Our father died 8 months ago. Suddenly. Horribly. Theron was in Scotland when it happened, managing an estate crisis. He did not make it back in time to say goodbye." Honora's chest tightened. "I did not know. How could you? We do not advertise our grief." Ottilie released her hands and stood, moving to the window. Grandmother began her campaign for Lady Fenella before father was cold in the ground. She believes duty supersedes feeling. She believes Theron should simply move forward as though nothing happened. But he cannot. He cannot. Ottilie turned back, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Sure, he hides it well. He performs his role as Duke with mechanical precision. But he is not present, not really. He is somewhere else entirely, and I do not know how to reach him." The words echoed in Honora's memory, stirring something painful. Her father, sitting in their cramped parlor, staring at walls stripped of paintings. Present in body, absent in everything else. "Perhaps," Honora said slowly, "he simply needs time." Perhaps. Ottilie did not sound convinced. Or perhaps he needs someone who refuses to let him disappear. The fittings consumed the entire afternoon. Madame Colette was a small French woman, with sharp eyes and sharper pins, who circled Honora like a hawk, assessing prey, before declaring her figure adequate but promising, and her coloring unexpectedly dramatic. Fabric swatches appeared and disappeared. Measurements were taken with military precision. Ottilie approved everything with lavish enthusiasm, adding shawls and gloves and slippers, until Honora lost count of the items being commissioned. "This is too much," she protested weakly. "I cannot possibly need 20 dresses." "You need 30, Ottilie corrected. "Morning dresses, afternoon dresses, walking dresses, evening gowns, ball gowns. We have 3 weeks until the Blackwood Ball and 17 events before then. You cannot be seen in the same gown twice." Honora thought of her single trunk of belongings, the 3 worn dresses she had brought from home. The contrast made her dizzy. By the time Madame Colette departed with a curtsy and a promise of swift delivery, Honora's feet ached and her head pounded. She wanted nothing more than to collapse in her beautiful room and sleep for a week. Instead, a footman appeared with a summons. "The Dowager Duchess requests your presence in her private study, miss. Immediately." Honora's stomach clenched. She looked at Ottilie, who offered an encouraging but anxious smile. "Courage," Ottilie whispered. "Remember, she only threatens people she respects." The walk to Lady Morvenna's study felt like a march to execution. Honora followed the footman through corridors she did not recognize, past portraits of Ashfords, who seemed to judge her with painted eyes, until they reached a door of dark oak that the footman opened without knocking. "Miss Liddell, Your Grace." Lady Morvenna sat beside a window overlooking the rose garden, her silver hair perfect, and her black silk immaculate. She did not rise when Honora entered, merely gestured to a chair opposite with one elegant hand. "Sit. We will speak privately." The door closed behind Honora, leaving them alone. For a long moment, Lady Morvenna simply studied her, that penetrating gaze missing nothing. Honora forced herself to meet the stare directly, though her heart hammered beneath her calm exterior. "You have survived your first morning at Thornwood Hall," the Dowager said finally. "Ottilie informs me you handled Madame Colette's assessments with admirable composure. I have been assessed before, Your Grace, though usually by creditors rather than modistes." Something passed across Lady Morvenna's face, not quite amusement, but something adjacent to it. "Yes, your circumstances have required you to develop a certain resilience. That is useful." She folded her hands in her lap with deliberate precision. "But resilience alone will not be sufficient for what lies ahead. You are about to enter a world that destroys people far more experienced than yourself. I need to know whether you truly understand what you have agreed to." "I understand. I am to pretend a connection with your grandson that does not exist in order to delay a marriage he does not want. I understand the charade must be convincing. I understand I will be watched, judged, and found wanting by people who have decided my worth based on my family's failures. And that does not frighten you?" "It terrifies me, Your Grace. But terror is not new to me. I have been terrified since my father lost everything. The only difference is the setting." Lady Morvenna's lips thinned. "Honesty. How refreshing. Though I wonder whether you will maintain that honesty when the season's pressures mount." "What would you have me say? That I am confident and unafraid? We both know that would be a lie, and you have already informed me you will know if I lie." "Indeed." The Dowager rose, moving to stand before the fireplace despite the warm afternoon. Her reflection in the mantel mirror showed a woman carved from ice and iron. "Let me tell you something about my grandson, Miss Liddell. Something that will not appear in gossip columns or society whispers." Honora waited, barely breathing. Theron loved his father deeply. More deeply, perhaps, than was wise. My son Edmund was unconventional. He married for love rather than strategy. He raised his children with affection rather than discipline. He taught Theron that duty and happiness could coexist. Lady Morvenna's voice held no emotion, but her knuckles were white where they gripped the mantel. He was wrong, of course. Duty and happiness are often incompatible. But Theron believed him. Theron built his entire understanding of the world on his father's philosophy. And then your son died. And then my son died. Suddenly, painfully, while Theron was 200 miles away, managing a crisis that could have waited. The Dowager turned, and for the first time, Enora saw something human behind the mask. Something raw and wounded. He did not reach Edmund in time. He did not get to say goodbye. And something in my grandson broke. Enora thought of Otilia's words. He is not here. He is somewhere else entirely. The Theron you have met, Lady Morvenna continued, is not the grandson I knew. That man laughed. He debated philosophy over dinner. He rode recklessly and danced beautifully and believed, truly believed, that life could be joyful. This man, she shook her head, this man is a ghost, performing the duties of a duke. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to understand the stakes. Lady Morvenna stepped closer, her gaze piercing. I do not care about your feelings, Miss Liddell. I do not care whether this arrangement brings you happiness or heartbreak. What I care about is my grandson. What I care about is whether you might, somehow, reach the man he used to be. You want me to fix him? I want you to try. Lady Fenella would bore him into an early grave. The society misses he has avoided for months would do the same. But you, the Dowager's eyes narrowed. You have fire. You have resilience. You have experienced loss and survived it with your spirit intact. Perhaps that is what he needs. Perhaps not. But I am willing to take the risk. Enora felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This was not what she had expected. Not a warning or a threat, but something stranger. Something almost like hope. And if I cannot reach him? If I fail? Then you fail, and the arrangement ends as planned, and Theron continues his slow disappearance into duty and numbness. Lady Morvenna's voice hardened. But know this, Miss Liddell. If you hurt him, if you manipulate his vulnerability for your own advancement, if you exploit his grief to secure a permanent position in this family, I will destroy you. Utterly. Completely. Without mercy. I have no intention of intentions change. Circumstances change. People who begin with noble purposes often end with selfish ones. The Dowager moved toward the door, signaling the end of their conversation. You have my blessing and my warning in equal measure. What you do with both is your own choice. She opened the door, and a footman appeared as if summoned by magic. Return Miss Liddell to her chambers. She will need rest before dinner. Enora rose on unsteady legs, her mind spinning with everything she had learned. At the doorway, she paused. Your Grace? Lady Morvenna raised one elegant eyebrow. You said your son taught Theron that duty, and happiness could coexist. Do you believe that is true? For a long moment, the Dowager did not answer. When she spoke, her voice was softer than Enora had ever heard it. I believe my son was the happiest man I ever knew. I believe he would not have traded a single moment of his life, even knowing how it ended. And I believe... She paused, something dawning in those gray depths. I believe I was wrong to dismiss his philosophy so completely. She turned away, and Enora was left with the strange feeling that she had just been given not only a warning, but a benediction. The question was what to do with either. 3 days passed in a blur of fittings, etiquette lessons, and Ottilie's relentless preparation. Enora learned which fork to use for fish. She learned the proper depth of curtsy for various ranks of nobility. She learned the names and scandals of 100 aristocrats she had never met, their alliances and enmities catalogued like weapons in an arsenal. Through it all, Theron remained absent. He appeared at meals, onto exchanging polite pleasantries with mechanical precision before retreating to his study. He acknowledged Enora with formal courtesy when they passed in hallways, but made no attempt at private conversation. He was present in body and absent in every way that mattered. exactly as Ottilie had described, exactly as his grandmother feared. On the fourth evening, Enora could bear it no longer. She found herself wandering the darkened corridors after everyone had retired, unable to sleep in her too-soft bed, her mind churning with everything that had happened and everything that lay ahead. The great house was silent around her, filled with shadows and moonlight that turned familiar spaces strange. Light spilled from beneath a door she did not recognize. The library, she realized, remembering Ottilia's hasty tour on her first day. The door stood slightly ajar, warm glow beckoning. She should return to her chambers. She should leave the Duke to his solitude. She should maintain the proper boundaries of their arrangement. Instead, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The library was vast, 2 stories of books rising toward a painted ceiling, ladders on brass rails providing access to upper shelves. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to stand in, casting dancing shadows across leather spines and gilded titles. Theron sat in a chair by the fire, a book open on his lap but clearly unread. He had removed his coat and cravat, his shirt open at the throat, his dark hair disordered, as though he had been running his hands through it. He looked nothing like the controlled Duke who had rescued her at the wedding feast. He looked human, exhausted, utterly alone. "Ah, Miss Liddell." His voice held no surprise. I wondered when curiosity would overcome propriety. I could not sleep. She remained by the door, uncertain whether to advance or retreat. I saw the light, and "You may enter. I do not bite, despite rumors to the contrary." She crossed to a chair opposite his, settling into leather that smelled of age and wood smoke. Between them, the fire crackled and spat, filling the silence. "This was my father's sanctuary," Theron said, not looking at her. His gaze remained fixed on the flames. He would spend hours here, lost in philosophy or poetry or military history. He used to say that books were the only honest companions. They never lied, never betrayed, never disappointed. Do you believe that? I believe they are easier than people. He finally turned to look at her, and the emptiness in his eyes made her chest ache. People require effort, emotion, engagement. Books simply are. That sounds lonely. Loneliness is preferable to loss. The words came out flat, practiced, as though he had repeated them to himself many times. If you do not allow yourself to care, you cannot be destroyed when caring ends. Enora thought of her father, retreating into silence, her mother, armoring herself with endless work, her brother, chasing schemes rather than facing reality. Different responses to the same wound. My father lost everything he built in a single day, she said quietly. A partner he trusted betrayed him. Investments he believed were sound turned to ash. He came home one evening and told us we would lose the house, the servants, the life we had known. He apologized for failing us. Theron's expression shifted slightly. Attention, perhaps. Interest. What happened then? He stopped speaking. Not entirely, not to strangers, but to us. To my mother, my brother, me. He became a ghost in our home, present but unreachable. We could see him, but we could not touch him anymore. Enora's voice trembled despite her efforts. It has been 3 years, and I still do not know how to reach him. I still do not know if he will ever come back. Silence stretched between them, heavy and strange. When Theron spoke, his voice was rough. That is why you agreed to this arrangement. Not just for the money or the references. For him. Partly. I thought, if I could provide stability, if I could remove the weight of worry, perhaps he might find his way back. She shook her head. It seems foolish now. I'm saying it aloud. It does not seem foolish. Theron leaned forward, firelight catching the sharp planes of his face. It seems like love, the kind that sacrifices without expectation, The kind that hopes despite evidence. Your grandmother told me about your father, about you not reaching him in time. His jaw tightened. My grandmother talks too much. She is worried about you. They all are. Honora met his eyes directly. Ottilie says you have disappeared, that you perform your duties, but you are not truly present, that you are somewhere else entirely. Ottilie should mind her own affairs. She loves you too much to do that. Something cracked in Theron's expression. A fracture in the careful mask he wore, revealing pain beneath. Do you know what the worst part is? His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The estate crisis that kept me in Scotland. It was meaningless. A dispute between tenants over grazing rights. Something my steward could have handled easily. I stayed because I thought it was my duty. I stayed because I was trying to prove myself worthy of the title I would someday inherit. You could not have known. No. But I chose duty over love. I chose responsibility over presence. And now my father is gone, and I never told him. He stopped, breathing hard, hands gripping the arms of his chair. I never told him that he was right, that happiness matters, that love is worth the risk. Honora moved without thinking, crossing the space between them, kneeling beside his chair. She took his hand in hers, feeling the tension in his grip, the fine tremor of emotion suppressed too long. Tell him now, she said softly. He may not be able to hear, but you can still say the words. Theron stared at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. For a long moment he did not move. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he spoke. You were right, Father, about everything, and I am sorry I did not see it sooner. The words hung in the firelit air, fragile and raw. Honora felt tears prick her own eyes, felt the weight of his grief press against her heart. Thank you, Theron said finally, his voice steadier. For listening, for not judging, for being here when you had no obligation to be. We are in this arrangement together, she reminded him. That creates certain obligations. No. He squeezed her hand, and something warm kindled in his expression. Something that had not been there before. This was not obligation. This was kindness, and I have not experienced much of that lately. He released her hand and stood, crossing to a shelf nearby. When he returned, he carried a small volume bound in blue leather. My father's favorite collection. Tennyson. He used to read from it every evening before bed. He pressed the book into her hands. I want you to have it. I cannot. You can. You must. His gaze held hers with unexpected intensity. The books should be read, not preserved. And something tells me you will appreciate them properly. Honora clutched the volume to her chest, overwhelmed by the gesture. A piece of his father, entrusted to her keeping. A bridge between grief and hope. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, then turned toward the door. Sleep well, Miss Liddell. Tomorrow begins your education in earnest. The ton will not be kind. I know. He paused at the threshold, looking back over his shoulder. But I will be watching. And I protect what is mine, however temporarily. Then he was gone, and Honora was left alone with the fire and the books and the strange warmth spreading through her chest. This was supposed to be temporary, a performance, nothing real. But holding his father's poetry in her hands, remembering the rawness in his voice, when he finally spoke his grief aloud, Honora wondered whether she had already made a terrible mistake. She was starting to care. The Whitmore Music Hall was not the Blackwood Ball, but it was significant enough to serve as a proving ground. Honora descended the staircase of Thornwood Hall in a gown of midnight blue silk that Madame Colette had delivered that afternoon, said the bodice embroidered with silver thread that caught the lamplight like scattered stars. Ottilie had supervised her hair, weaving pearls through the dark waves, and pronounced her devastating. She did not feel devastating. She felt like a lamb dressed for slaughter. Theron waited in the entrance hall, resplendent in black evening clothes that made him look even more intimidating than usual. But when his eyes found her on the stairs, something warmed in his expression. Something that made her breath catch unbidden. "You look." He paused, as though searching for words that would not reveal too much. "Appropriate." Ottilie made a sound of disgust. "Appropriate? She looks magnificent. You absolute disaster of a brother. Tell her she looks magnificent." "She knows what she looks like." But a hint of warmth touched his voice. "The carriage is waiting." Lady Morvenna joined them in a sweep of black silk and diamonds, her assessing gaze traveling over Enora with surgical precision before offering a single nod. "You will do. Remember everything Ottilie has taught you. Speak only when spoken to unless you have something clever to say. And for heaven's sake, do not let Fenella provoke you into impropriety." The carriage ride passed in tense silence. Enora reviewed names and alliances in her head, a litany of aristocratic connections that still felt foreign on her tongue. Beside her, Theron sat close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through her gown, his presence simultaneously reassuring and nerve-wracking. The Whitmore residence blazed with light, carriages queuing along the curved drive, footmen in powdered wigs helping guests descend. When their own carriage reached the entrance, Enora's heart beat so fiercely, she thought surely everyone must hear it. Theron offered his arm. "Ready?" "No." "Good." Overconfidence leads to mistakes. He covered her hand with his own, the touch brief but grounding. "Stay close. Follow my lead. And remember, you belong here tonight." She did not believe him, but she let him guide her up the marble steps and through doors that opened onto a world of crystal and candlelight. The Whitmore ballroom was smaller than she had imagined, but no less intimidating. Perhaps 200 guests circulated through the space, their jewels and silks creating a constantly shifting tapestry of wealth and privilege. A string quartet played in one corner, and the air smelled of hothouse flowers and expensive perfume. Every head turned when they entered. Enora felt the weight of those stairs like physical pressure, felt the whispers ignite in their wake like gunpowder catching flame. She forced herself to maintain composure, to keep her chin lifted and her expression serene, even as her stomach churned with anxiety. "The Duke of Ravencrest," the major domo announced, "Lady Ottilie Ashford, the Dowager Duchess of Ravencrest, and Miss Enora Liddell." Her name, spoken aloud in this glittering room, as though she had every right to be here. The surreality of it nearly made her stumble. Theron's hand tightened on hers. "Steady." They descended into the crowd, and Enora entered the crucible. The next hour blurred into introductions and assessments. Lady Whitmore examined Enora with barely concealed curiosity, before pronouncing herself delighted, in a tone suggesting otherwise. Lord Ashworth, an elderly gentleman with kind eyes, engaged her in conversation about poetry, and seemed charmed by her responses. Young ladies surrounded Ottilie and Enora, their questions pointed but not hostile. Through it all, Theron remained nearby, not hovering, not obvious, but present. When Lord Pembury approached with transparent fortune-hunting intentions, Theron materialized with a smooth excuse about needing Enora for an introduction elsewhere. When a sharp-tongued matron began probing too deeply into her family circumstances, Ottilie swooped in with a distracting piece of gossip. She was being protected, managed, positioned like a chess piece by people who understood this game far better than she ever could. And then Fenella Blackwood appeared. She was even more beautiful up close than she had been across the wedding feast, with her crimson gown cut to emphasize every elegant line of her figure, her blonde hair arranged in elaborate curls that must have taken hours to perfect. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "Your Grace." Her voice was honey poured over ice. "How wonderful to see you. And Miss Liddell, is it? I have heard so much about you." "Lady Fenella." Honora kept her voice pleasant, despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. "Nothing too scandalous, I hope. On the contrary, the mysterious woman who captured Ravencrest's attention at the Pemberton wedding has become quite the topic of conversation." Fenella's smile did not reach her cold blue eyes. "Though I confess, having seen you now, I cannot imagine what sparked such interest. You are rather ordinary." "Oh, are you not?" The words landed like carefully aimed arrows. "Lady Fenella." Theron's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I was not aware you had developed expertise in assessing character based on appearance. How fascinating." Fenella's smile tightened. "I meant no offense, Your Grace. Simply an observation. Miss Lytle is undoubtedly charming in her own modest way." "Miss Lytle," Theron said coldly, "is a guest of my family, and will be treated with the respect that position deserves. I trust I make myself clear." For a moment, something ugly crossed Fenella's expression. Then the mask of pleasantry reasserted itself. "Perfectly clear, Your Grace. Do enjoy the musicale." She swept away in a rustle of crimson silk, and Honora released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "You should not have done that," she murmured. "Oh, she is dangerous. She is tedious." Theron guided her toward the refreshment table. "And I will not stand by while she attempts to humiliate you in public. This arrangement does not require you to defend me." "No, but I find I wish to regardless." Before she could process those words, the musician struck up a waltz, and Theron turned to face her with unexpected formality. "Miss Liddell, would you honor me with this dance?" The request was loud enough to carry, deliberate enough to draw attention. Around them, conversations paused, as aristocratic heads turned to observe the Duke of Ravencrest, asking the mysterious nobody to dance. Honora placed her hand in his. "The honor is mine, Your Grace." They took the floor alone for the first several measures, and Honora felt the weight of 100 watching eyes. But when Theron's hand settled at her waist, when his gaze met hers with unexpected intensity, the watchers seemed to fade. "You are thinking too much," he murmured as they began to move. "I can practically hear your mind cataloging everything that could go wrong." "Everything could go wrong. Your grandmother is watching. Lady Fenella is watching. Everyone is watching. Then let them watch." He pulled her slightly closer, just enough to be noticeable. "Let them see that the Duke of Ravencrest has chosen his partner for the evening, and that he has no intention of releasing her." They turned across the floor, and Honora forgot to count steps, forgot to worry about form or propriety or watching eyes. There was only Theron's hand warm at her waist, his shoulder solid beneath her palm, on his intense focus holding hers in a way that made her dizzy. "You dance beautifully," he said softly. "My mother taught me. Before everything fell apart, she wanted me prepared for a life I would never have. You have it now, at least for tonight." The music swelled toward its conclusion, and Honora felt something dangerous stirring in her chest. This was supposed to be performance, pretense, a business arrangement with clear boundaries and a predetermined end. But the way Theron looked at her, the way his thumb traced small circles against her waist, the way he held her as though she were precious rather than merely useful, none of that felt like pretense. The waltz ended. They stood in the center of the floor, neither moving to separate, while applause scattered around them and whispers exploded into open conversation. "So everyone is talking about us," Honora breathed. "Let them talk." Theron's voice was rough, his gaze dark with intensity. "Let them say whatever they wish. I find I no longer care." He released her with visible reluctance, bowing over her hand with formal correctness. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Liddell." "Thank you, Your Grace." But the words felt hollow compared to what had passed between them on that floor. And as they rejoined the watching crowd, Enora knew that something fundamental had shifted. This was no longer just an arrangement, and that terrified her more than anything. Later that evening, when the musicale had ended and the guests had begun to depart, Theron found her alone on the terrace overlooking the Whitmore Gardens. She stood at the stone balustrade, breathing cool night air that smelled of roses and approaching rain. The moon hung low and heavy, casting silver light across manicured lawns. "You should be inside," Theron said, appearing beside her. "People will talk if we are seen alone together." "People are already talking. You made certain of that with our dance." "I made certain they understood that you are not to be dismissed or underestimated." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Fenella will think twice before attacking you directly again." "Is that why you did it? Strategy?" The question hung between them, charged with everything neither had said. "It began as strategy," Theron admitted quietly. "It did not end that way." Enora turned to face him, her breath quickening. In the moonlight, his features were softer, more human, less the controlled Duke and more the grieving man who had spoken to his dead father in the library. "This was supposed to be simple," she whispered. "A temporary arrangement, a performance." "I know. I am not supposed to feel—" She could not finish the sentence, could not name the warmth spreading through her chest, the way her breath caught when he looked at her, the ache she felt when she imagined this ending. Theron stepped closer, lifting his hand to cup her face. His touch was gentle despite the strength in his fingers, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. "I know," he repeated, his voice rough. "Neither am I." Then he kissed her. It was not the chaste brush of lips that propriety would demand. It was real and desperate and hungry, his mouth claiming hers with an intensity that stole her breath. She gripped his lapels, pulling him closer, feeling the heat of him through layers of silk and wool. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, reality came crashing back. They stood on an open terrace where anyone might have seen. They had just complicated an already impossible situation beyond all repair. They had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. "We should not have done that," Enora whispered, though she made no move to step away. "No," Theron agreed. "We should not have." But he kissed her again anyway, and she let him, and the moonlight wrapped around them like a benediction. The days following the musicale existed in a strange limbo between fantasy and reality. Enora attended afternoon teas and morning calls with Otelia, fielding questions about her connection to the Ashford family with increasingly practiced deflection. She received visitors at Thornwood Hall who examined her like a curiosity while pretending to simply take refreshment. She smiled until her face ached and made pleasant conversation until her mind went numb. But beneath the performance, everything had changed. She and Theron did not speak of the kiss. They maintained proper distance in public, exchanged formal pleasantries at meals, behaved as though the moonlit terrace had never happened. And yet, his eyes found hers across crowded rooms. His hand lingered when he helped her into carriages. His voice dropped to something almost tender when they were briefly alone. Neither of them knew how to navigate what was growing between them, and so they pretended it was not happening and fooled absolutely no one. "You are being ridiculous," Otillie declared one afternoon, finding Enora in the library with an unread book. "Both of you, mooning about like lovesick poets when you could simply acknowledge the obvious. There is nothing obvious. There is nothing but obvious." Otillie dropped into a chair opposite, her expression exasperated. "He looks at you like you hung the moon, Enora, and you look at him like he is a puzzle you cannot stop solving. Just admit you have feelings and deal with the consequences. The consequences would be disastrous. Honora set down her book, meeting Ottilie's eyes directly. I am a bankrupt merchant's daughter, pretending to belong in your world. He is a duke with obligations to his title and his family. Whatever we might feel, it cannot lead anywhere. Why not? Because your grandmother would destroy me, because society would never accept the match, because I refuse to be the woman who trapped a duke into marriage through manipulation of his vulnerability. Who said anything about trapping? Ottilie leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. Honora, my brother is not a fool. He knows exactly who you are and where you come from. If he chooses you despite all of that, it is not because you have manipulated him. It is because you have shown him something real. Something real does not pay debts or satisfy duty. No, but something real might make him want to live again. Ottilie's voice softened. I have watched my brother disappear for 8 months. I have watched him go through the motions of existence without actually existing. And then you arrived. And suddenly there is light in his eyes again. Suddenly he emerges from his study. Suddenly he laughs. He laughed? Yesterday, at something grandmother said. I nearly fell over from shock. Ottilie reached across to grip Honora's hand. You are bringing him back. Whatever else happens, whatever the outcome of this arrangement, you have given us a gift we cannot repay. Honora's throat tightened with emotion. She wanted to believe Ottilie, wanted to believe that what was growing between her and Theron could somehow survive the impossible circumstances surrounding them. But she had spent too many years watching hope curdle into disappointment to believe in fairy tales. The Blackwood Ball is in 3 days, she said quietly. After that, the season will begin winding down. Lady Fenella's family will increase their pressure. Your grandmother will eventually demand resolution. And I will need to decide whether to end this before someone gets hurt beyond repair. Or you could fight for what you want. I do not even know what I want. Ottilie's expression was knowing. Yes, you do. You are simply too afraid to admit it. Before Honora could respond, a footman appeared in the doorway. Miss Liddell, you have a visitor, a Mrs. Petrina Hale. Every trace of warmth drained from the room. Honora rose slowly, her heart suddenly pounding. My cousin is here. She's waiting in the morning room, miss. She says it is a matter of urgent family business. Ottilie grabbed her arm. You do not have to see her. After what she did at the wedding feast, if I refuse, or she will know she still has power over me. Honora squared her shoulders, despite the ice spreading through her veins. I need to face her, whatever she wants. The walk to the morning room felt endless. Each step brought her closer to the woman who had humiliated her, used her, delighted in her suffering. By the time she reached the door, her composure was held together by sheer determination. Petrina stood by the window in burgundy velvet, her expression sweet as poisoned honey. Cousin, how delightful to see you settled so comfortably. When I heard you had become Lady Ottilie's companion, I simply had to come and offer my congratulations. What do you want, Petrina? Straight to business? How dull. Petrina moved closer, circling Honora like a predator assessing prey. Though I suppose directness is all you can offer. You never did have talent for subtlety. You came here to insult me? You could have sent a letter. I came to warn you. Petrina's smile turned sharp. Lady Fenella Blackwood is not pleased with your interference in her plans for the Duke. She has been asking questions about your family, about your father's business failures, about the debts Jonathan still owes to certain unsavory creditors. Honora's blood ran cold. What questions? The kind that lead to scandal. The kind that could destroy whatever fragile position you have constructed here. Petrina leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Did you think you could simply waltz into their world and belong? Did you think they would accept you? You are nothing, Enora. You have always been nothing. And when Lady Fenella reveals exactly how nothing you are, oh, not even a duke will be able to save you. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to watch your face when the walls come crashing down. Petrina's eyes glittered with malice. Because you dared to make me look foolish when Ravencrest chose you over abandonment. Because I have waited years to see you destroyed. And now it is finally about to happen. She swept toward the door, then paused. The Blackwood Ball will be quite the event, cousin. I would not miss it for the world. Then she was gone, and Enora stood alone in the morning room, her carefully constructed world cracking around her like ice beneath too much weight. The following morning, Lady Morvenna summoned them all to her study. Enora entered to find Theron already present, his expression carved from stone. Ottilie sat nearby, her face pale with anxiety. The dowager stood by the fireplace, holding a letter that trembled slightly in her grip. "Close the door," Lady Morvenna commanded. "We have a situation." Enora obeyed, her heart already sinking. "Lady Fenella's mother has written to inform me of certain discoveries." The dowager's voice was ice. "It seems they have been conducting investigations into Miss Lytle's background. Thorough investigations." "Grandmother," Theron began, but she silenced him with a raised hand. "They know everything. Your father's bankruptcy, your brother's gambling debts, and associations with men of questionable character. Your mother's work as a seamstress. Every shameful detail of your family's fall from respectability." Lady Morvenna's gaze fixed on Enora with devastating intensity. "And they intend to reveal all of it at the Blackwood Ball. Publicly. Humiliatingly. Unless my grandson announces his engagement to Lady Fenella immediately." The words crashed over Enora like a wave. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet, felt everything she had built over the past weeks crumbling to dust. She had known this was coming, had known from the beginning that she did not belong. But somehow, foolishly, she had let herself hope. "This is blackmail," Theron snarled. "I will not submit to it. You may have no choice." Lady Morvenna turned to him, her expression conflicted. "If they expose Miss Liddell's circumstances at the ball, she will be ruined. Completely. No references or connections will save her from that level of scandal. She will never secure a respectable position anywhere. Then we counter their exposure with truth. We acknowledge her circumstances ourselves and control the narrative. And what narrative would that be? That the Duke of Ravencrest knowingly courted a penniless impostor? That he conducted a fake arrangement to avoid a strategic marriage?" The dowager shook her head. "Either way, she is destroyed. And you are diminished." Enora stepped forward, her voice steady despite the cracking of her heart. "Then, there is only one solution." She met Theron's eyes, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "I leave. Tonight. Before the ball. If I am gone, there is nothing to expose. No scandal to create. Lady Fenella gets what she wants, and your family survives intact. No." Theron crossed to her, gripping her shoulders. "I will not let you sacrifice yourself for my convenience." "It is not sacrifice. It is reality." She pulled free from his grip, wrapping her arms around herself. "This was always temporary, Your Grace. We both knew it would end. I simply did not expect it to end like this. Enora, your grandmother is right. Whatever has grown between us, it cannot survive this. I will not allow you to destroy your position for a woman with nothing to offer but complications." Her voice broke slightly. "Please, let me go with dignity rather than disgrace." Silence fell like a shroud. Lady Morvenna watched them with an expression that might have held regret. Ottilie wept silently in her chair, and Theron stood frozen, his eyes bright with emotions he could not articulate. "This is not what I want," he said finally, his voice raw. I know. Honora blinked back tears. But it is what must happen. She turned and walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. I will pack my things. Please have a carriage ready within the hour, and... She swallowed hard. Thank you. For everything. For showing me what might have been possible in a different world. Then she left, and the door closed behind her with terrible finality. An hour later, Honora climbed into a waiting carriage with 2 small cases containing her borrowed life. She had left most of the dresses, had left the pearls and the slippers and the accessories that had never truly belonged to her. She kept only the Tennyson Theron had given her and 1 gown, the midnight blue she had worn to the musicale, because she could not bear to part with every reminder. Marjorie had helped her pack with tearful protests that Honora could not afford to acknowledge. Atelier had appeared in her doorway, ready to argue. But Honora had shaken her head, and Ottilie had simply embraced her fiercely instead. Lady Morvenna had not come. But a small purse had appeared on her bed, containing more money than Honora's family earned in a year. Payment for services rendered, or perhaps guilt transformed into currency. She did not look back as the carriage pulled away from Thornwood Hall, could not bear to see the house where she had briefly believed she might belong. In her lap, the Tennyson pressed against her palms, its leather warm from her grip. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. She was not certain she believed that, but she had no choice except to try. Home was smaller than she remembered. The modest house where Honora had grown up now seemed cramped and dim after the soaring spaces of Thornwood Hall. The worn furniture, the patched curtains, the smell of cabbage and tallow candles, everything she had briefly escaped, came rushing back with suffocating familiarity. Her mother embraced her tearfully, asking a dozen questions. Jonathan looked guilty and relieved in equal measure. Her father sat in his usual chair by the window, staring at walls that had once held paintings. You are home, her mother said simply. That is what matters. But it was not what mattered, and they all knew it. For 3 days, Honora moved through her childhood home like a ghost. She helped with mending, with cooking, with the endless small tasks that kept their household limping forward. She tried not to think about Theron, about the kiss on the terrace, about the way he had looked at her like she was something precious. On the 4th morning, her father spoke. When you loved him. Honora froze, her needle suspended over the shirt she was mending. It was the most words her father had strung together in months. I barely knew him, she managed. That is not an answer. Her father turned from the window, and for a moment, something like his old self surfaced in his eyes. I recognize the look you wear, daughter. I wore it myself when I realized I had lost everything I built. The despair of believing that possibility has ended. Possibility has ended. Whatever might have existed between us, it was never real, never sustainable. You believe that because you are afraid, because hoping seems too costly. He rose slowly, crossing to sit beside her. I made that choice after my business failed. I chose despair over hope, because hope hurt too much. And I have spent 3 years in a prison of my own making. Honora's eyes filled with tears. Father, I failed you. Failed all of you. Not when the business collapsed, but when I stopped trying to live afterward. When I retreated into silence and left your mother to carry burdens I should have shared. His voice cracked. I do not know if I can find my way back, but I know I do not want to watch you make the same mistake. It is different. I had nothing to offer him. I still have nothing. You have yourself. That is not nothing. That is everything. He took her hand, squeezing with surprising strength. If he was worthy of your love, he knew your value even when you could not see it. And if he truly wanted you, not the arrangement, not the convenience, And then perhaps you should have trusted him to fight for what he wanted." The words landed in the hollow space where Enora's hope had lived. Had she trusted him? Or had she assumed the worst, fled before he could choose, protected herself from rejection by rejecting first? Before she could answer, a commotion erupted from the street outside. Voices, the clatter of hooves, a carriage stopping before their modest door. Jonathan appeared in the parlor, his face pale. "Enora, there is a duke outside. He is asking for you." Her heart stopped, then started again, racing so fast she could barely breathe. "Tell him." She swallowed hard. "Tell him I will be down in a moment." Jonathan fled. Her father squeezed her hand once more, then released it. "Hope is painful," he said quietly. "But regret is worse. Whatever happens next, choose courage." Enora stood on trembling legs, smoothed her worn dress with shaking hands, and walked toward the door. Theron Ashford stood in her mother's tiny parlor, like a storm contained in human form. He wore riding clothes rather than formal attire, his dark hair windswept, his eyes wild with emotion she had never seen him display. Mud splattered his boots. His cravat was askew. He looked nothing like a duke, and everything like a man who had ridden through the night without stopping. "You left," he said, the words ragged. "You left without letting me speak, without letting me fight for you." There was nothing to fight for. Enora's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Lady Fenella has the ammunition she needs. My presence would only have made everything worse. Your presence is the only thing that makes anything better." He crossed the small room in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. "Do you understand? I have spent the last 4 days going slowly mad. I have shouted at my grandmother, terrified Ottilie, and driven my horse halfway to collapse because I could not bear another moment without seeing you. Theron," I called off the Blackwood ball. His eyes burned into hers. "I sent word to every family in London that the Duke of Ravencrest would not be attending, that any announcements Lady Fenella's family expected to make were fantasies of their own creation, that I have no intention of marrying her now or ever." Enora's breath caught. "You cannot have. Your grandmother." "My grandmother can adapt or be damned. I have spent my entire life bending to duty, to expectation, to what others believed I should want. And where has it led me? To a father's deathbed I did not reach, to 8 months of emptiness I could not escape, to the only woman who has made me want to live again walking out my door because she believed I would not choose her." Tears spilled down Enora's cheeks. "I am no one, a bankrupt merchant's daughter, with nothing. You are everything." He cupped her face in his hands, wiping her tears with his thumbs. "You are courage when I had forgotten bravery existed. You are warmth when I had convinced myself numbness was preferable to pain. You are the first person in 8 months who looked at me and saw a man instead of a title. The scandal. Let there be scandal. Let Lady Fenella expose every detail of your family's circumstances to every gossip in England. I will stand beside you through all of it, and dare anyone to say a word against you." His voice dropped to fierce intensity. "My father married for love against everyone's objections. He told my grandmother he would rather have 10 years of happiness than 50 years of suitable contentment. He was right. I finally understand that he was right." Enora's hands came up to grip his wrists, holding him as he held her. "I love you," Theron said, the words breaking free as though he could no longer contain them. "I love your courage and your fire, and your refusal to be diminished by circumstances. I love the way you challenged my grandmother and comforted my grief and refused to let me disappear into duty. I love you, Enora Liddell, and I am asking you, I am begging you to come back. Come back to what? Your arrangement? To my life, to my home, to whatever future we can build together." He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her lips. Marry me. Not for convenience or strategy or family obligation. Marry me because I cannot imagine existing without you. Because you have woken something in me I thought was dead, and I refuse to let it die again. Her blood was rushing so fiercely she could barely hear herself think. All her logical objections remained. The social barriers, the family scandal, the impossibility of a merchant's daughter becoming a duchess. But beneath the objections, beneath the fear, something stronger was rising. Hope. Your grandmother will never accept me, she whispered. My grandmother has already written you a letter of apology. It is in my coat pocket if you wish to read it. His lips quirked with something almost like humor. She told me that if I let you go, I would be proving myself unworthy of the Ravencrest title. I believe her exact words were, "Stop being an idiot and go get her." Despite everything, Honora laughed, a broken, tearful sound that contained more joy than she had felt in weeks. And Ottilie? Ottilie threatened to never speak to me again if I returned without you. She also sent 17 letters detailing exactly how wrong I was to let you leave in the first place. And Lady Fenella? Lady Fenella can take her strategic alliance and find another duke. There are plenty available. I am not among them. His hands tightened on her face. Honora, I have answered your questions, so now answer mine. Will you come back? Will you marry me? She thought of her father's words. Choose courage. She thought of Ottilie's fierce belief. Fight for what you want. She thought of the library at Thornwood Hall, the moonlit terrace, the waltz where everything changed. She thought of Theron's grief and growth, of the man emerging from the armor of duty, of the love she had never expected to find. Yes, she breathed. His kiss swallowed the word before it fully left her lips. He pulled her against him with desperate strength, his mouth claiming hers as though he had been drowning, and she was air. She clung to him, tasting salt from her own tears, feeling the frantic beat of his heart against her chest. When they finally parted, both breathless, she became aware of her family watching from the doorway. Her mother was crying, or her brother was grinning, and her father was smiling for the first time in 3 years. Well, Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion, I suppose this means we are moving up in the world. Theron did not release Honora, keeping her tucked against his side, as though he feared she might disappear. You are all moving to London, he said. There is a house on the Thornwood estate that has been empty for years. It will suit your family perfectly. And I believe there may be opportunities for honest work that Mr. Liddell might find suitable to his talents. Honora's father straightened slightly. You would do that? For us? For Honora. For the family that raised her to be the woman I love. Theron's eyes were warm. If you will have me as a son. I believe, her father said slowly. That would be acceptable. And for the first time in years, Honora felt the weight of fear begin to lift from her shoulders. They were going home. The Ashworth Ball 3 weeks later was the most anticipated event of the season. Everyone who mattered had received invitations. Everyone who pretended to matter had begged for them. The guest list included the cream of aristocracy and one particular duke whose romantic choices had set London ablaze. Honora descended the grand staircase on Theron's arm, wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that Madame Colette had created specifically for this moment. Diamonds sparkled at her throat, borrowed no longer, but gifted, a wedding present from Lady Morvenna herself. Behind her, Ottilie followed in rose pink, radiant with triumph. The Dowager Duchess brought up the rear in her signature black silk, her expression daring anyone to offer commentary on her grandson's choice. The ballroom fell silent as they entered. Honora felt the weight of hundreds of watching eyes, heard the whispers ignite like wildfire, spreading through dry grass. They knew who she was now. Lady Fenella had made certain of that, spreading every detail of the Liddell family's circumstances through every drawing room in London. But she no longer cared. "Ready?" Theron murmured beside her. "No, but I am doing it anyway." His lips quirked. "That seems to be our way." They descended into the crowd together, and the whispers grew louder. "That is her? The merchant's daughter? I heard the father lost everything gambling. The brother worked as a clerk. A clerk. How could Ravencrest possibly?" The voices cut off abruptly as Theron stopped in the center of the ballroom, turning to face the assembled guests with the full authority of his title. "Lords and ladies of London," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the sudden silence. "I have an announcement to make." The room held its breath. 3 weeks ago, I asked Miss Honora Liddell to become my wife. She said yes. He lifted her hand, pressing a kiss to her fingers. "Tonight, I have the privilege of presenting her to you, not as Miss Liddell, but as the Duchess of Ravencrest." The gasps were audible. A woman in yellow actually swooned. Lord Pemberton choked on his champagne. And across the room, Lady Fenella Blackwood stood frozen, her face white with fury. "Why, some of you have heard rumors about my wife's family," Theron continued, his voice hardening. "Allow me to address them directly. Yes, her father's business failed. Yes, her family experienced hardship. These facts make her more worthy of respect, not less. She knows the value of struggle. She understands what can be lost and what must be protected. She has more courage in her smallest finger than most of you possess in your entire beings." Silence, absolute and thunderous. "My wife will be treated with the respect due her station. Anyone who believes otherwise will discover exactly how motivated a duke can be when defending what is his." His gaze swept the room like a blade. "Do I make myself clear?" Murmurs of assent rippled through the crowd. Fans fluttered nervously. Eyes dropped to avoid his stare. Then Lady Morvenna stepped forward, her voice carrying across the ballroom with decades of aristocratic authority. "A toast," she declared, raising her champagne glass. "To the Duke and Duchess of Ravencrest. May their marriage be as happy as my son's was, and may anyone who speaks against them find themselves absent from my invitation list permanently." Given that Lady Morvenna's invitation list controlled access to half the events in London, the message was clear. Glasses raised throughout the room. "To the Duke and Duchess!" The orchestra struck up a waltz, and Theron drew Honora onto the floor. "That was terrifying," she murmured as they began to move. "That was necessary. They needed to understand that attacking you means attacking me, and attacking me has consequences." He pulled her closer than propriety allowed. "Besides, I rather enjoyed it. You enjoyed threatening half the aristocracy? I enjoyed defending my wife." His smile softened. "I will never tire of that word. Wife." They turned across the floor, and Honora saw Ottilie watching with tears streaming down her face. Saw Lady Morvenna nodding with something that looked almost like pride. Saw Lady Fenella turn and sweep from the ballroom in a fury of crimson silk. "She is leaving," Honora observed. "Good riddance. She can find some other duke to pursue. I am completely unavailable." "Completely? Irrevocably? Permanently?" He pressed his lips to her forehead. "You have ruined me for all other women, Honora Ashford. I hope you are satisfied." "Reasonably satisfied," she admitted, "though I may require additional convincing. That can be arranged." The waltz ended, and the crowd pressed forward with congratulations, both sincere and calculated. Honora smiled and nodded, and accepted their words with grace, playing the role of Duchess as though she had been born to it. Perhaps in some ways, she had been. 6 months later, the library at Thornwood Hall had become their sanctuary. Honora sat curled in the leather chair by the fire, Tennyson open in her lap, though she was not reading. Instead, she watched her husband at his desk, reviewing correspondence with the focused attention he brought to everything. Her husband. 6 months later, the words still made her breath catch. "You are staring," Theron observed without looking up. "I am observing. There is a difference." "Is there?" He set down his pen, turning to face her with a smile that still made her heart flutter. "And what have you learned from your observations? That you work too hard, that you carry tension in your shoulders, that you need a distraction from whatever tedious letter has been occupying you for the past hour." "Do I? And what distraction do you propose?" She closed her book, rising from her chair with deliberate grace. "I found something today, in the library's upper shelves." "Oh?" She retrieved the letter from her pocket, the paper yellowed with age, the handwriting achingly familiar from the Tennyson margins. "Your father wrote it. Years ago, apparently. It was tucked into a book of philosophy and forgotten." Theron's expression shifted, pain and hope mingling in his eyes. "What does it say?" Enora crossed to sit beside him, pressing the letter into his hands. "My dear son," it began. "If you are reading this, I've probably gone and done something dramatic, like dying unexpectedly. I apologize for the inconvenience. These things are rarely well-timed. I want you to know that whatever happens after I am gone, you have already made me proud. Not through duty or title or accomplishment, but simply by being who you are. A man of integrity, a man of feeling, a man who will, I hope, choose love when it finds him, even if that love comes in unexpected form. Your grandmother will tell you that duty matters more than happiness. She is wrong, though she means well. Duty matters, but happiness is what makes duty bearable. Without it, you are simply going through motions, performing a role rather than living a life. Find someone who makes you want to live, Theron. Find someone who challenges you and comforts you and refuses to let you disappear into the title. Then hold on to them with everything you have, because love like that is rare and precious and worth any scandal or sacrifice. I loved your mother for 10 years before she died. Those 10 years contained more joy than most people experience in 80. I would not trade a single moment, even knowing how it ended. Be brave, my son. Be foolish. Be so deeply, embarrassingly in love that the gossips cannot stop talking about it. That is my final wish for you. All my love, your father." Theron's hands trembled as he finished reading. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with tears he did not try to hide. "He knew," he whispered. "Somehow, he knew exactly what I would need to hear." He knew his son. Enora reached up to cup his face, wiping the tears with her thumbs. "And he raised him to be a man capable of choosing love." Theron pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest, as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For falling asleep on my shoulder. For being brave enough to stay. For teaching me that love is not a weakness." Enora smiled, nestling against his chest. "You are welcome. Though technically, I never fell asleep on your shoulder. I simply sat alone at a wedding feast until you rescued me. Even better." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "You were brave enough to accept rescue. You were brave enough to negotiate terms. You were brave enough to love me even when it terrified you. You made it easy. I made it complicated. But you stayed anyway." Outside the library windows, spring was arriving in the Thornwood Gardens. Inside, two people who had found each other against impossible odds simply held on, grateful for every moment. "Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that defies expectation, in courage that overcomes fear. in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I am grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. Do you have a favorite moment or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you would like more romances with emotional depth and characters worth rooting for. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most powerful choices we make are the ones that terrify us most. And sometimes, sitting alone at a feast is exactly where we need to be to find everything we never knew we wanted. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.